Welcome to the entertaining world of ABC Video. A world of exciting programs for you to enjoy and collect. From Australiana to Australian comedy, great sporting events to the great days of steam. A world of entertainment for you to collect now on ABC Video.
In the beginning, man believed flight to be the privilege of mythological gods. The gods of Crete, of Egypt, of Assyria, and of Greece. As man's capabilities developed, so developed his power to dream of his own ability to fly. Leonardo da Vinci, whose genius stands in marked contrast to the ideas of his contemporaries. If it were not for the dreams in his fertile mind and the dreams in the minds of generations that followed, there would have been no tomorrow. Throughout history, throughout the world, the achievement of sustained, controlled, and powered flight eluded man. The dream was there, but never fulfilled. Sir George Cayley, with his revolutionary wing designs, solved the problems of lift. Steam and clockwork planes followed in 1857. Mosaiski's 1884 steam plane almost succeeded. Then, in 1903, the Wright brothers flew and created fresh dreams in the minds of the young. The River Duwamish, Washington State, in 1975. The Red Barn, William Boeing's first factory, built in 1909, is being moved downstream to be restored as the Museum of Flight. One of Boeing's first employees recalls his early days.
I'm Mike Pavoni, and I was born in 1903, the same year that Orville Wright flew at Kitty Hawk. And ever since I can remember, when I was 6 years old, I passed an airplane over here on Harbor Island, and I was fascinated by it. And a couple of years later, my dad and we went to South Tacoma to see the horse races, and we passed an airplane there that was taking up rides for people, and my dad had to jerk me out of there and I'd go to the horse races. And ever since then, I was really fascinated with the aircraft. And later, when I got through school, I went down to Boeing's and I hired in 1920 as an apprentice mechanic. And that was the start of my career there with aviation.
William Boeing was born in Detroit in 1881 of wealthy German parents. Educated in Switzerland and at Yale, he moved to the Pacific Northwest in 1903. Having already developed a love of fast cars and boats, the events at Kitty Hawk implanted a new challenge, the challenge of flight. But it was not until 1915, when he met Conrad Westervelt of the US Navy, that his dream would be realized, when, after buying a Martin seaplane and dismantling it, they decided they could build a better one.
this is where it all began. The B&W, built in 1916, 13 years after the Wright brothers. There were two of them built. One of them was exported to New Zealand. The other one remained here in Seattle.
The B&Ws were shown to the US Navy, who suggested various modifications for use as a trainer. And as America entered the war, they placed an order for 50 of the craft. Orders for the Boeing C, as it was designated, soon waned as the war drew to a close, and Boeing had to ride out the slump using his own resources, at one stage making furniture and sea sleds. It is now 1923, and Boeing has developed a system of arc welding steel tubes to replace the timber then in use. And it was the success of this new construction method and the company's aggressive pursuit of military orders that made it, by 1927, one of the largest aircraft companies in the USA. Throughout the late 20s and 30s, William Boeing continued to develop the company. His perfectionism and ability to choose the right associates were his greatest assets. The company continued to attract orders for fighter and military training aircraft, as well as building a series of seaplanes for the US mail service. In 1927, Boeing outbid all competition for this lucrative service between San Francisco and Chicago. And although bankruptcy was predicted by his rivals, the Type 40 mail plane, which carried passengers as well as considerable amounts of mail, saved the day. "24 were rushed into service in just 2 years of operation, carrying 1,300 tons of mail and 6,500 passengers. Boeing had set new standards and still made a profit. From these profits, he went on to form his own airline, Boeing Air Transport, later to be called United Airlines. There followed a series of innovations both in design and airline management. The Model 80 airliner became the first to carry a stewardess. Then, in 1930, came the Model 200 monomail. Only 2 were built, but the method of construction using duralium spars and sheeting was to have a far-reaching effect on the industry. It marked the death knell of the biplane airliner. Owing much to the monorail, Boeing then developed the Model 247, which first flew in 1933. It was, however, overshadowed by its commercial rival, the Douglas DC-3. Boeing's then began a series of super-large aircraft, something they were to become famous for. In 1938 came the Boeing Clipper, which set new standards of passenger comfort and became the pioneer of long-haul flight. It was the experience gained building huge aircraft such as the Clipper and the darkening war clouds over Europe that encouraged Boeing to enter the field of large bomber aircraft. The 294, at the time the largest aircraft in the world, was developed from an earlier model designated the 299. Although grossly underpowered, they were to be the stepping stones to one of the most famous aircraft to see service in the Second World War. Egfet, who was president of the company at that time, had the wisdom to realize that the government specification for a multi-engined aircraft could mean 4, and recommended that the company should go ahead with the design of the 299. Its ability to sustain battle damage had a lot to do with the construction techniques used initially on the monomail. The aircraft was built in separate components and could be assembled in units or by subcontractors, thus making it possible to produce large numbers of aircraft from relatively small factories. The B-17 had been born, and with America's eventual involvement in the Second World War, production began in earnest.
Well, of course, we were working 3 shifts a day and basically 7 days a week, which certainly contributed to the high rate. And we had lots of people, you know, and it was very noisy, but it wasn't really confusing. We had the wing line, and we had the engine shop, and, you know, we had the final assembly, and, you know, it was just very compact, and of course it grew with the rates, you know.
Many of the changes were changes dictated by experience in combat. The first of these, of course, the most obvious was the tail turret, which was installed first on the B-17E, and then additional armament and revisions to armament were made all throughout the life of the program to add the firepower where it was needed, or to add armor plate or protection of various kinds as required by combat experience. Using hindsight, of course, you could have designed it as a B-52, but without hindsight, there aren't very many changes that appeared to be necessary that didn't get made.
The B-17 was to become a familiar sight in eastern England. Nearly 13,000 were to be built, mainly by Boeing, but also with the help of subcontractors Douglas and Lockheed. Over 5,000 were lost in combat, yet it accounted for over 6,500 enemy planes, nearly half the total shot down by US aircraft. And it was a bomber, not a fighter. It is one of the ironies of war that if William Boeing's father, Wilhelm, had not chosen to emigrate to America, Boeings might well have been flying alongside Heinkels and Dorniers. In 1985, on the 50th anniversary of the B-17, some of the wartime air crews met again in Seattle.
Yeah, that was cold. Your hands would freeze. They were heavy. Your feet would get cold. Yeah. Got frostbitten. The old masks would leak. Now, ice, about 2 inches thick, right along here. They once said that 2 gunners in here is like 2 guys with jackhammers in a telephone booth. we had to, we took turns, you know, we had to make sure that we were out of each other's way. We were always bumping rears. And then the cartridge is on the floor. It's like a roller coaster.
Too fast, 6 o'clock now, coming in, driving out cheap. B-17 in trouble out at 2 o'clock, watching. Got an engine on fire. Just 2 more times for the 94. 3 planes, 9 o'clock, coming around. Keep me on, boy. Around the 10. Watch them, so keep your eyes open. Yeah. They're breaking at 11, breaking at 11. I got them. He's coming around underneath at 10 o'clock. I see they over at 2 o'clock. He come out of the bomb bay.
Yeah, I see him.
There's a tail gunner coming out.
Watch out for fighters. Keep your eye on them, Bill.
See any parachutes, Quinlan?
Parachutes open. Black at 9 o'clock.
8 men still in that B-17. Come on, the rest of you guys. Get out of there.
Come on, Bill.
So far, there's 3 more shoots. Flak, 11 o'clock.
Fighters, 6 o'clock.
ME-109 at 3 o'clock.
Keep back. I'm on him. Come on, you son of a bitch. I got him.
Quinlan, confirm that fighter.
He got him, Chief. Look, he's bailing out.
Yell on that intercom. Fighters, 10 o'clock.
Watch those 2 and 12, Ben. They're coming in.
They're coming in, Scotty.
Get that ball turret on him.
Save the ammunition as much as possible.
It is a sad fact of life that an invention as potentially beneficial as the aircraft should be used for the wholesale destruction of man. Jean Genet, a poet of the 40s, wrote, "Suddenly at night the bombers came in the hard reverberating bowl of the sky, destroying the factory and the tall cathedral, the dock, the warehouse and the railway station, the rich house in the leafy avenue, and the shouldering tenements of the narrow streets, and the bodies and souls of men." I sought my son among the smoking stones where I had crouched with him clutched at my breast, until the bomb burst and the building shattered down, and the dark came and severed my son from me. I cried out with a voice harsh in my throat, "My son, I have lost my son."
You ask about being scared? Yes, we were scared. We were thankful we were coming back because we lost a few of the boys there.
B-17Fs and started going in deep penetration, we didn't have fighter escorts to go very far. We had P-47s, but they'd only go in a short ways, and then they'd have to leave us, and then the Germans would take over, and it scared us to death.
Highway about 60, 70 miles an hour, and some guy swerves over, and you get that feeling through you that you're going to be hit. Well, that's that feeling you have for hours at a time. And after a while, it's just, you just accept it. It's like hanging. You take your hang long enough, and you're used to it.
It's cool because our eyeball was able to go higher than our other bombers, for one thing. So that put the war up higher. And that was all to the good, because it got it up at least part of the way out of the flak and stuff. So the B-17, of course, was able to take, I think, more punishment than any of the rest of our bombers.
Well, I don't think that they were thinking about the strength of the airplane. They just knew that they had a weapon, and it was the only weapon that they had, and they were going to use it. And they did use it, and they used it with extreme effectiveness.
It happened when, soon after takeoff, on the return, almost made it. It ended for Ralph, Jack, Richard, Carl, Randolph, Russell, Louis. Here in this Norfolk field, the bite of metal on this too unsolid flesh. The stone of passing interest to walkers in the summer, buffeted by the eastern winds, still warrants flowers from someone. Good as the B-17 was, the US Army had a need for a high-altitude pressurized bomber. Before the war, Boeing had developed the Stratoliner with a supercharger and a sealed fuselage. 4 were even ordered by Pan American as passenger airliners. But the prototype stalled and crashed on March the 18th, 1939. As a result, new fins were fitted, and with the experience gained with the B-17, the Model 294 and the Stratoliner led, in 1942, to the B-29 bomber. With its pressurized crew compartments and its 4 Wright engines, it was capable of 315 knots and a service ceiling of 32,000 feet. It was the heaviest combat aircraft to enter service in World War II and was used mainly in the Pacific, becoming involved in various heavy raids on the Japanese mainland. On August the 6th, 1945, a B-29 named Enola Gay took off from Tinian. Piloted by Colonel Paul Tippett, it dropped the first atomic bomb on Hiroshima. It devastated the city, killing over 75,000 people. On August the 9th, a second B-29 dropped the bomb on Nagasaki. Mara Tamiki, a Japanese poet of the 40s who suffered radiation burns and sickness and who later committed suicide, wrote, "In the fire, a telegraph pole. At the heart of the fire, a telegraph pole like a stamen, like a candle, blazing up like a molten red stamen. In the heart of the fire, on the other bank from the morning, one by one, fear screamed through men's eyes. At the heart of the fire, a telegraph pole, like a stamen." For flyers, the age of innocence was finally over. The dream had turned into a nightmare. Prior to and during the war, development work had taken place in Europe on the gas turbine engine, and by 1945, a number of single and multi-engine jet aircraft had been flown in Great Britain and Germany. Amongst them, the famous ME-262, which the B-17s were to meet during the closing stages of the war. In 1943, the United States Army Air Force had issued its requirements for a jet bomber, and in 1945, with access to the work in Germany, as well as its own research, Boeing started development of the B-47, which first flew in 1947. With its high aspect ratio wing and 6 engines, it presented its pilots with many problems. The wing could flex as much as 17 feet at its tip, and at certain altitudes, moving the stick back would result in a slow speed stall, and moving it forward resulted in high-speed buffeting, which became known as coffin corner. A British designer said of the B-47, it had little control at high speed, had to be landed through a letterbox, and would never be accepted at Boscombe Down, the British Aircraft Evaluation Centre. But yet again, valuable lessons were learned and put into use in its successor, the B-52.
This is Boeing Tower. You are cleared to make a straight-in approach to runway 13. Wind southwest 25. Gust to 35. Extreme caution. 80 to 90 degree right crosswind. Report at Harbor Island. Over.
005, roger on crosswind condition. Gear down.
The work on the B-47 and B-52 was to stand Boeing in good stead for the commercial battles to come. Production director Joseph Sutter continues the story.
Going back to World War II, if you remember, Boeing got heavily involved in bombers, B-17s and B-29s for the war effort, and that really put Boeing out of the commercial business for several years. At the end of the war, Boeing, with the desire of getting back in the commercial business, first developed an airplane derived from the B-29, using that wing, and it used a very, very large reciprocating engine. But jets had started development in World War II, and over in England, de Havilland, using a Ghost engine, developed by their own company, was developing the Comet. Boeing was watching that activity very hard. Boeing, meanwhile, had developed the B-47 bomber, which was a pure jet, and it was obvious that the jet engine was going to produce a dramatic improvement in reliability, performance, And we believed in economics and finally in range when the engines quit burning so much fuel. The Comet made quite an impression and pretty much proved that jet travel was going to be far superior to struggling through the air at 20,000 feet in the clouds and slow speed. So when an engine came along that looked like it was going to produce an efficient jet, we immediately began exploring the possibility of jet airplanes. Boeing first did it by using a Pratt & Whitney engine and building a prototype. We called it the 367-80. It was actually the prototype of the 707 airplane. It was built using Boeing's own fund. Only one airplane was built. It was never intended to certify it or put that particular model in service. It was to prove the concept. And the Dash 80 really made quite an impression and very quickly developed into the 707 program. That first model was a intercontinental model. New York to London was one of the prime routes. Pan American, British Airways were a couple of the key customers. That kept developing from model to model, and we finally built about 900 of those airplanes, and the 707 really did a lot towards establishing long-haul jet travel.
The 707 was to become one of the best-known aircraft in the world and was to help in the development of a new military order, the KC-135 tanker, which was built for the United States Air Force and is seen here being rolled out for the first time in July 1956 alongside the KC-97, which it was designed to replace. Had it not been for the military orders, things could have been tough for Boeing. It was not until 1963, when over 1,000 707s had been sold, that the aircraft moved into profit. However, Boeing's next aircraft, the medium-haul 727, was to become the world's best-selling airliner, with nearly 2,000 entering service around the world. With the smaller 737, together they formed the backbone of major airlines.
Well, after the 707 and a much greater acceptance of air travel, it was obvious that if that efficiency could be built in other airplanes, the whole air transportation system could take off and produce quite a bit of benefits to everybody, including profits to the operators. So Boeing then pursued medium-haul airplanes like the 727 and finally all the way down to the little 737. So the jets really covered the whole field. Air travel really did take off because of the jets, and it was obvious that the next step is to try and satisfy a bigger market demand. More people wanted to travel. The cost of air travel was still a little bit too high. The way to improve that is to go after better efficiency, which meant improved engines and better aerodynamics, better structure, and larger capacities. Boeing, in discussing this situation with the major potential customers, was amazed to find out that the airplanes we were thinking of were too small. And that really was the bringing into being of an airplane the size of the 747. That size was not picked by Boeing. It was picked by airlines like Pan American, British Airways, Lufthansa, Japan Airlines. And it was quite a shock to we engineers when they asked us to produce an airplane that large, especially with a brand new style of engine called the high bypass ratio engine. And you have to give a lot of credit to the engine manufacturers. Without those kind of engines, we couldn't be making the type of airplanes like the 747. But the combination of the very efficient high bypass ratio engine, also it gave us the ability to lift that capacity into the air. That produced operating economics that really produced air transportation as we know it today. It was a very, very bold gamble. Boeing was putting the net worth of the company online. It exhausted Boeing's resources, and Boeing got pretty thin financially at the time we delivered the first 747. I think that kind of a gamble would be hard to take today.
On February the 9th, 1969, after days of sub-zero conditions, the 747 and its crew were ready for the first flight. The rain and cold conditions still threatened, and the hope for break in the weather did not materialize. They waited for a break in the clouds that covered Payne Field, Everett, Washington State. Then, just before noon, the hoped-for break in the clouds came, and the 747's crew decided to attempt a takeoff. In less than 1,000 yards of runway, the 16-wheeled, 317-ton largest passenger aircraft in the world took to the air.
Heading 240, 1,500 feet, little turbulence. The old girl soaks that turbulence up very nicely. Okay, turning left. Turn coordinator is working, doing its job normally, apparently, and the airplane is just excellent.
After a little over an hour's flying, the 747 heads for home. It was to be the beginning of a new era of jet transport, carrying more people further and faster. The age of the jumbo was born.
Hi, Al. Jack, how are you?
Good, good.
Well, first things first, isn't that correct?
Good, always, right.
Okay, Jack, natural question is, what are your impressions?
Well, Al, I guess this sounds complacent or something, but that thing is just ridiculously easy to fly. It's just a pilot's dream.
The SST program had a lot of problems with it. It somewhat got involved with national objectives, which didn't make economic sense. And Boeing was developing a very good and efficient SST, but frankly, it didn't have enough range or capacity to offer supersonic flight at the economic level that would allow enough people to buy a ticket. And that really is why the SST disappeared in the mid-1970s. It was competing against the 747, and there was no competition. There is improvements in technology. The engine manufacturers know potentially what kind of engine we need. It will be a tremendous investment in that kind of engine in airplane, and it'll come, but it's still going to be a long ways off because of the terrific, very, very large amount of financial input into the program. But it'll happen.
In 1960, Boeing acquired the Vertol Aircraft Corporation in Morton, Pennsylvania. Frank Piasecki had developed and flown a large tandem rotor helicopter in 1945, at the time the largest helicopter built, carrying 10 passengers. Various developments followed, resulting in the H-21 series, known in the Army as the Flying Banana, seen here working on offshore posts that serve as part of the early warning system for the United States. With their large capacity, they did valuable rescue work during the Andrea Doria disaster and during the floods in Mexico. From the Flying Banana, Boeing went on to develop the Chinook battlefield helicopter, 550 of which were used in Vietnam. By now, the company had grown from just 21 at the old Red Barn to over 130,000, some of whom are working on the new generation of jet transports.
Brandon Tower, Boeing 757 is ready to taxi into position.
Boeing 757, proceed on the runway.
757.
Wind 170 at 20.
Roger. Boeing 757 ready for takeoff.
Boeing 757 cleared for takeoff, runway 33, wind 180 at 24.
Roger.
Boeing 757 contact Seattle departure 119.5. Good day.
Thank you very much. We'll be talking to you again soon.
Got some good weather down in Renton and snuck off. Found some blue sky up north here. And we basically checked the airplane at all flap settings, all speeds below 250 knots. We checked initial buffet at each flap setting. And we checked the max placker speed at each flap setting. Also, we retracted and lowered the gear.
Very routine flight.
It was fantastic in the fact that everything went just as programmed. Couldn't have written a better script. So far, from what we've felt, it's a very nice handling airplane. It's a very straightforward, honest, nice handling airplane.
This is Boeing 757 experimental.
Boeing 757 experimental, Payne Tower.
We'd like to turn inbound for your airport.
757 experimental, roger, wind 190 at 20, peak gust 38, altimeter 29091.
Roger, 2991. A windy day, isn't it?
Yeah, got a little bit.
757 would like to do a 180 on the runway and taxi to the Boeing ramp.
And 757, 180 approved, taxi to the ramp.
Okay, we'll do it. Thank you.
Looks like you had a little bit of bumpiness there.
Yeah, a little bit. It was different than sometimes.
Boeing now has a new rival in the marketplace, this time from Europe, in the shape of the Airbus, similar to the 757 and the latest 767. Boeings have a curious stake in their new rival. The parts for the Airbus, produced by various companies in Europe, are flown to the assembly sites in Germany by the Guppy, a rather strange aircraft based on the Boeing Stratocruiser.
Boeing 757, contact Seattle departure 119.5. Good day.
Thank you very much. We'll be talking to you again soon.
But it is perhaps the workhorses, the 707s, 727s, and 747s, that have helped to shrink the world, enabling people to meet and to travel and to achieve one of mankind's oldest dreams, to fly. In the beginning, man believed flight to be the privilege of mythological gods. The gods of Crete, of Egypt, of Assyria, and of Greece. As man's capabilities developed, so developed his power to dream of his own ability to fly. Leonardo da Vinci, whose genius stands in marked contrast to the ideas of his contemporaries. If it were not for the dreams in his fertile mind and the dreams in the minds of generations that followed, there would have been no tomorrow. Throughout history, throughout the world, the achievement of sustained, controlled, and powered flight eluded man. The dream was there, but never fulfilled. Sir George Cayley, with his revolutionary wing designs, solved the problems of lift. Steam and clockwork planes followed in 1857. Mosaiski's 1884 steam plane almost succeeded. Then, in 1903, the Wright brothers flew and created fresh dreams in the minds of the young. Germany in 1945. During the previous 5 years, Europe had seen the idealistic dream of flight turn into a terrible wartime nightmare. But this was not the end, rather a new beginning. For from this destruction, German aviation has blossomed afresh. Spurred on by the burning desire of its early pioneers, Germany has now taken its place at the forefront of aircraft technology. Today, two massive corporations dominate German aviation. MBB, Germany's largest aircraft conglomerate, and Dornier, the country's last independent aircraft producer. Companies started by two of Europe's great aviation giants, Willy Messerschmidt and Claude Dornier. Of the two men, Claude Dornier's career was the longest, spanning the whole spectrum of aviation development from the airship to space exploration. Born in 1884, Dornier was a most reluctant genius. His first ambition was to be an architect. Dornier's school record was, however, undistinguished. Yet after leaving school, he enrolled at the Munich Technical University, where he gained an excellent engineering degree. It was on a trip to Lake Constance in 1910 that Dornier first saw Count von Zeppelin and his airships. Zeppelin had become a national hero in Germany, and despite many setbacks, was pioneering the development of lighter-than-air flight. Dornier, inspired by this charismatic figure, applied for a job. To his surprise, he was summoned to Friedrichshafen. At this time, many airships were being lost through a new and mysterious problem, metal fatigue. Claude Dornier came up with a new type of metal flange that both reduced weight and added strength. It was this breakthrough that enabled much larger Zeppelins to be constructed, so paving the way for both military and civil development. In the following years, the Zeppelin company went from strength to strength, and regular passenger services were started to many European cities. New endurance records of up to 24 hours were set, and from 1910 to 1914, 35,000 passengers were carried on routes spanning thousands of miles. Dornier was soon promoted, and as head of the test department, he solved yet another crucial problem, that of handling an airship in strong ground winds. It was 1913 when Dornier came up with this unique design for rotating an airship hangar as it floated on a reservoir of water. Seeing the potential in his new protege, Zeppelin gave Dornier his own airship design project. His machine, the Victoria Louise, incorporated many innovations in metal construction. And as the airship was moved out for its test flight, Dornier could only watch. After initial tests, the order was given for takeoff. With a full complement of passengers on board, the Victoria Louise's first test flight also proved a great success. This airship carried out many civilian trips before its final conversion to military use. The German people soon became captivated by these great airships, and many thousands would gather at Friedrichshafen to watch their departures. Amongst them was a young boy whose name was also to become synonymous with German aviation, Willy Messerschmidt. Born in Hamburg in 1898, Messerschmidt had always been fascinated by flight, and at the age of 11 was present at the first German air display, where the Wright brothers' aircraft were being demonstrated. Inspired by these early pioneers, Messerschmitt soon began to construct his own model gliders, basing his ideas on Germany's earliest pioneer of flight, Otto Lilienthal. Lilienthal is the unsung hero of world aviation. His work provided the first practical evaluation of actual flight and was used extensively by the Wright brothers. Lilienthal believed that one can only get a proper insight into the practice of flying by actual flying experiments. In 1892, after many failures, Lilienthal launched himself into the history books with his first flight of 80 meters. After making many successful flights, he earned the reputation as the first man to fly a practical heavier-than-air machine with any consistency. During the next 4 years, he fabricated numerous models, which were sold all over the world and inspired many early aircraft designers. In 1896, during the flight trials of a new design, he crashed and was killed. His philosophy and work was to have a profound effect on the young Messerschmitt.
At the age of 15, he got associated with a man by the name of Hart. And Hart was building gliders in those days. This was the First World War, 1914-15 then, and Hart had to become a soldier, but he sent postcards to young Willy Messerschmitt on how he should build these gliders, and so he did. So he got a very early and young involvement in aviation through this construction of gliders, and in fact flying of gliders.
Claude Dornier was also turning his attention to fixed-wing aircraft, and in 1914 he began work on a large flying boat. Instead of using wood, cloth and piano wire, Dornier opted for a lightweight metal construction, and in 1913 the RS-1 was launched on Lake Constance. But it never flew. The night before the test flight, it was wrecked by a violent storm. Undeterred, Dornier constructed the RS-2, which made its first flight in 1916. The aircraft proved successful, and the RS-3 soon followed, containing the innovative tandem engine arrangement that was to feature largely in his later aircraft. During the final stages of World War I, Dornier also built a series of successful fighter aircraft, pioneering the use of lightweight alloy metals and modern production line techniques. But events were soon to overtake Dornier and Messerschmitt. With the armistice of 1918, aircraft production was halted. The subsequent Treaty of Versailles ordered the wholesale destruction of German aviation, and a ban on all future construction was imposed. Willy Messerschmitt escaped serious loss, since gliders were exempt from the ban. But Claude Dornier lost everything. His aircraft were broken up, his airships destroyed, his business ruined. The once busy Manzel plant on Lake Constance lay empty and derelict. Despite his seemingly hopeless situation, Dornier was determined to continue working, and soon began designing aircraft from his home. In 1920, he produced a small flying boat, the Labella. To avoid the construction ban, he moved to a boatyard in Switzerland, and a year later, the Labella made its symbolic maiden flight over Lake Constance. But Dornier soon finds the Swiss facilities too small, and with a larger project in mind, he buys a derelict shipyard at Marina di Pita in Italy. Dornier throws his last hope into a large twin-engine flying boat. This unique aircraft, designated Val, proves highly successful. So much so that the Spanish government orders 6 even before flight trials are complete. It ensures Dornier's future. The Val flying boat's solid construction and powerful engines made it popular with pilots. The first long-distance flights were attempted by the Spanish pilot, Ramon Franco, in 1924. But during his first attempt to cross the Atlantic, he was forced to ditch through lack of fuel. After 8 days, the Val was salvaged from the heavy seas, having sustained only slight damage. The crew's survival is a testament to Dornier's unique design. Throughout the 20s, a series of highly publicized expeditions were to earn the Dornier Company international acclaim. The Swedish explorer Amundsen used 2 Val aircraft in a daring attempt to reach the North Pole. but after 9 hours flying, he was forced to make a landing on the pack ice to refuel. One of the flying boats was damaged beyond repair. With only limited food supplies, the crew worked desperately to clear a runway for takeoff. After 2 weeks, the overloaded Val took off and managed to clear the pack ice. Landing in Spitsbergen several hours later, Amundsen declared that he owed his life to Dornier. A year later, a German pilot, Herr von Grono, made a successful crossing of the Atlantic, landing in New York without incident. In 1925 alone, the Val set 25 world records, including endurance, speed, altitude, and payload. With the growing demand in Europe for passenger transport, Dornier designed the land-based Mercury and Comet types. The latter proved particularly successful, and Air Lloyd, later to become Lufthansa, opened many new international routes using this aircraft. Dornier designs were now being sold all over the world. Dornier himself spent several months in Japan, assisting their embryonic aviation industry. In 1927, with the ban on aircraft construction in Germany lifted, Dornier moved back to Germany, opening up his old factory on Lake Constance. He soon began to develop one of the most remarkable aircraft of his career, the Doe X. After 3 years of planning and construction, the flying boat was launched on the 12th of June, 1929. With 3 decks and a wingspan of 157 feet, the Doe X was the heaviest aircraft of its day. 12 Bristol Jupiter engines, paired in 6 tandems, were needed to power the machine, and each one had to be run up and tested before takeoff. After some brief maneuvering, he gave the order for takeoff. The aircraft lifted easily from the water into the air. It was one of the greatest moments of Claude Dornier's life. 318 flights proved the capabilities of the Doe X. On occasions, it carried up to 170 passengers. After a year of these flight trials, the Doe X took off for a world tour. Every kind of luxury was available on board, and Dornier himself was present for several sections of the trip. After crossing the South Atlantic to Brazil, the Doe X flew north and arrived in New York to a rapturous welcome. Thousands of people came out to watch this giant aircraft circle the city. And after a successful landing, Dornier is given a hero's welcome. On his return to Germany, Dornier found himself once again elevated to the status of a national hero. He had proved, despite his many critics, that an aircraft of this size could have an effective range and levels of safety and comfort hitherto undreamt of. The Doe X represented the first steps towards mass passenger transport. It stands as a landmark not just for German, but for world aviation. But by now, flying boats of this size were beyond the finances of Europe's rapidly collapsing economy. Dornier, along with other German aircraft companies, survived only through generous government subsidies. However, Dornier's Vol flying boats were still proving very successful, and Lufthansa began a regular transatlantic mail service to Brazil. 2 supply ships, the Bremen and the Westphalian, refueled the aircraft at sea and relaunched them by steam catapult to complete their flights. Despite the severest weather conditions, 400 of these pioneering crossings were made until 1939 without a single delay or accident. As well as upgrading his flying boat series, Dornier began work on a new land-based aircraft, and in 1931 he produced the advanced passenger transport, the Doe K. Its success gave Germany a high-performance airliner which could beat the competition from Europe and the USA. Dornier returned to flying boat design in the mid-30s and produced the Doe 19. And after extensive testing, including severe sea trials, the Doe 19 made a non-stop flight from the Azores to New York. The journey was completed in 22 hours and 12 minutes and marks the beginning of European transatlantic passenger service. The Doe 24, which followed, was designed specifically to deal with the severe weather of tropical regions. It proved highly successful in the Far East and remained in service with the Spanish Air Force in an air-sea rescue role until 1969. The Doe 26 was Dornier's last production flying boat, incorporating the very latest aerodynamic technology and was built for transatlantic passenger service. It was also the first Dornier aircraft to carry the Nazi symbol. In the next few years, all Dornier aircraft were committed to military use, and Claude Dornier was to find himself part of a highly effective war machine. Throughout this period of Dornier's success, Messerschmitt still struggled for survival. During the First War, he continued to develop his gliders, and in 1922, he and his close collaborator, Friedrich Hart, started a small flying school. The special demands of glider design, low weight and drag combined with high strength and lift, led Messerschmitt to produce many new features, including the single spar wing, which was to prove so significant in the success of his later powered aircraft. In 1923, Messerschmitt formed his own aircraft company, and after a slight relaxation of the Versailles Treaty, he produced a series of powered gliders, culminating in the successful M-17, a small two-seat machine. A year later, with a strong injection of capital, Messerschmitt set up a large company, Messerschmitt Flugzeugbau. To meet the demands of the expanding German airlines, he produced the M-18, a single-engine monoplane carrying 10 passengers. Production was soon started, and the M-19 and the M-20 followed. With the world slump of 1929, demand for aircraft dried up. Unlike Dornier, Messerschmitt found no government subsidy, and in 1931 he went bankrupt. But political events were about to transform Messerschmitt's life. With the rise of Hitler in 1933, covert rearmament began, and huge amounts of cash were injected into the German aviation industry. At first, Messerschmitt undertook various small license contracts and continued to develop his gliders, which proved vital in the secret training of Luftwaffe pilots. But in 1934, a new order is placed, officially for a training aircraft. There can be little doubt, however, of the government's intentions to produce an advanced trainer for the Luftwaffe. For Messerschmitt, it provided a golden opportunity to incorporate a range of new designs, including a leading-edge slat, originally a Handley Page patent, and exchanged by Messerschmitt for the single-spar wing design. All-metal monocoque construction, flush riveting, and a fully retractable undercarriage made the ME-108 the most advanced aircraft of its time. After testing and some modification, the 108 went into full production. Its small 240 horsepower engine could manage 165 miles an hour, an excellent power-to-weight ratio, and a tribute to Messerschmitt's background in glider design. The 108 became the standard trainer and communication aircraft during the whole of the war period. The design proved so durable that it went back into production in the 1960s and competed very favorably with modern designs. The Me-108 was also the forerunner of Germany's most famous fighter airplane. In 1934, the government had given several German aircraft companies the specifications for a fast monoplane fighter. Both Messerschmitt and Heinkel produced designs. Heinkel had unsuccessfully tried to buy out Messerschmitt's struggling company in 1932, and now he poured scorn on Messerschmitt's design. At the fly-off between the two prototypes in 1935, the Heinkel 112 broke the world speed record. 3 days later, Messerschmitt's design won it back.
The airplane was revolutionary by its very low weight and high power, again, like the earlier Messerschmitt philosophy, and also a good design for manufacturing, not with the very optimum aerodynamic shape, but with a good compromise to also allow mass production.
Some 35,000 109s were eventually built in 100 different variants, more than any other combat aircraft. They formed the backbone of the Luftwaffe's fighter strength throughout the early conflicts of World War II, including the Battle of Britain. Although outclassed by the later years of the war, it remained in service both because of its ease of production and its devastating effects on daylight bomber raids, as this German newsreel shows. The success of the 109 made Messerschmitt Germany's leading aircraft designer. Called upon to make many propaganda films, he became as famous as the fighter ace Adolf Galland and others who flew the aircraft. Messerschmitt's next project, the Me-110, dated back to 1934 and a specification given to him for a new combat aircraft. Design work on a series of prototypes was begun, and on its first test flight, it reached a remarkable speed of 316 miles per hour. Tested in combat during the Battle for Poland, it proved a great success. Only when faced with the RAF did the 110 suddenly become a disaster. Outclassed by the Spitfire and Hurricane, it was soon necessary for 109s to escort the escort fighters. However, later in the war, it proved highly effective as a night fighter. A derivation of the Me-110, the 210, proved a failure for Messerschmitt. However, a new version, the Me-410, proved more successful and served as a destroyer and night fighter to the end of the war. One of the most remarkable of Messerschmitt's wartime aircraft was the giant glider, the Me-321. Following the success of airborne forces in 1940, the German High Command ordered the development of a large transport aircraft capable of invading Britain. Made of steel tubes, wood and fabric, the 321 could carry 33 tons, enabling small tanks and motorized units to be transported. Highly vulnerable and difficult to fly due to its vast control surfaces, the Me-321 never proved an effective design. The 323, fitted with 4 and later 6 engines, did go into production, but many were lost in combat. Another large project was the Me-264. Capable of bombing the USA, it could have proved a serious threat to the Allies, but only one prototype had flown by 1945. In the later stages of the war, German industry used all kinds of forced labor, including concentration camp victims. Many thousands of these people were used in Messerschmitt's plant. Although not directly ordered by Messerschmitt, he was certainly aware of their suffering. Messerschmitt's link with the Nazis had always been close. He owed his very existence to the vast aircraft orders placed by the German military. Hitler himself became a regular visitor to Messerschmitt's plants. Claude Dornier's connection with the Nazis was more ambiguous. The Dornier company had not been so dependent on military aircraft orders, and his personal attitude to the Nazis is not recorded. Apart from the continuing success of his flying boats, Dornier produced only one production aircraft series, based on the Doe 17. Unlike other German aircraft at the time, the Doe 17 was originally intended as passenger transport, but Lufthansa rejected the machine because of its cramped cabin. However, its high speed and maneuverability made it an excellent military aircraft. The Luftwaffe placed large orders, and mass production began in 1937. Despite its success in the early months of the war, the Doe 17 soon proved inadequately armed, and Dornier produced an improved version, the Doe 215, with a larger cockpit for greater visibility and a position for a rear-facing gun under the nose. Dornier's pioneering spirit was also to produce one of the most advanced fighters to fly in the war. The Doe 335 was conceived to meet the demands for a high-speed, high-altitude interceptor. Dornier went back to a patent of 1937 for a unique twin-engined arrangement, one pulling from the nose and one pushing from the tail. In 1939, extensive trials with models began, largely to determine the effect of engine weight in the tail. Because of the rear prop, a tricycle undercarriage was essential. The first test flight took place in 1941, with Dornier anxious to see the results of this radical new design. After initial trials, the aircraft reached a speed of nearly 480 miles per hour, faster than any other prop aircraft of the war. Full production was ordered, although of the 60 that were completed, only 20 reached combat units by 1945. But this was not the end of Claude Dornier's involvement with this aircraft. The last surviving example was taken to America in 1946, where it was placed in store. 25 years later, Dornier brought it back to Germany and began its restoration. Despite the difficulty of spares, Dornier's engineers managed to reassemble the aircraft and return it to its original condition. It now stands as the only example of a tandem prop aircraft in the world. The demands of a desperate high command for a cheap, mass-produced, high-performance fighter gave rise to many innovative designs. One of the most remarkable was the Me-163, seen here on an early unpowered test. The Me-163 Comet was conceived by Dr. Alex Lippisch, but production and later development was carried out by Messerschmitt. The aircraft was powered by one of the new generation of rocket engines. To reduce weight and drag, the Me-163 had no tail or undercarriage, taking off on a trolley which was later jettisoned and landing on a wooden skid. The first test flight took place in 1941, and after considerable development, it became operational in 1944. But the aircraft had its dangers. The volatile fuel could dissolve the flesh of pilots and ground crew in a matter of seconds. The high speed of over 600 miles an hour made it difficult to control, and its short endurance, less than 1 hour, limited its effectiveness. In the end, the 163's inherent dangers led to more aircraft being lost in accidents than were destroyed in combat. Despite its drawbacks, 370 Comets were produced and proved a serious threat to the Allies. Able to outperform any of their escort fighters, it caused heavy losses amongst US daylight bomber raids. It remains to this day the only mass-produced rocket fighter in the world. But rocket power was soon to be surpassed by a new and rapidly developing power source, the jet engine. Messerschmitt's old rival, Ernst Haeckel, had designed and built the first jet aircraft, the HE-178, in 1938. Powered by a Junkers-designed turbojet, it had its first test flight on the 24th of August 1939. As it lifted from the runway for the first time, few people realized that this small aircraft was to change the shape of world aviation. With the HE-178's success, the race was now on to develop the first production fighter. Heinkel, with a significant lead over his rivals, produced the HE-280, seen here undergoing gliding tests. After extensive trials, the first powered flight took place in August 1941. But Heinkel was not alone in the field. Willy Messerschmidt rapidly designed a new twin-engine jet aircraft. It was to prove to be the most effective fighter of the war. Messerschmitt's prototype had its first flight in 1942, and after modification was chosen in preference to the HE-280, which was soon scrapped. As with the HE-280, the 262 was powered by two Junkers turbojets. Despite their innovative design, they were prone to catch fire and were generally unreliable in the early versions. When the engines did work, the aircraft's performance was impressive. A rate of climb of 12,000 meters a minute and a speed of 470 miles per hour outclassed any Allied fighter. Crippled by fuel shortages and Hitler's insistence that it be used as a bomber, the 262 never lived up to its full potential. It represented both the height and at the same time the end of Willy Messerschmitt's career. In 1945, virtually all of Dornier and Messerschmitt's plants were destroyed. Both men were captured by the Allies and imprisoned for 2 years. The ban on aircraft production was imposed once again. German aviation lay buried beneath the rubble of its factories. But the reconstruction of this shattered country demanded engineers, and after the release in 1947, both men began to rebuild their companies. Dornier moved to a small factory and started to design and build weaving machines, a subsidiary which has survived to this day. Messerschmitt reopened the Augsburg plant and constructed prefabricated housing. Later, he designed a successful sewing machine, a four-door car, and his famous three-wheeled bubble car. But Messerschmitt wasn't satisfied.
Aviation was, of course, always on Willy's mind in those days where he was not permitted to do that in Germany. And in the early 50s, an opportunity was offered to do airplane design in Spain. Spain had been a licensee of Messerschmitt in the early 40s. In fact, the Messerschmitt 109 was built there under license construction. And the Spaniards wanted to do modifications of that airplane, including putting a British engine, a Rolls-Royce Merlin, in there instead of the Daimler-Benz engine, which was no longer available. But then the Spaniards also wanted some training airplanes, and Messerschmitt, together with the engineering team of that Spanish company, developed the first Spanish jet airplane, a little twin-jet trainer.
Claude Dornier was also forced to turn to Spain to continue his passion for aviation. In 1950, he established a technical office in Madrid, and with the help of a German and Spanish design team, he produced the DO-25, a short takeoff and landing reconnaissance aircraft. The first test flight in 1954 proved a great success, and the Spanish government, echoing their earlier involvement with the VAL aircraft, placed a large order, once again ensuring Dornier's survival. In 1955, with the ban on aviation development lifted, Dornier returned to Munich to build the more advanced DO-27. Investing all his resources to begin production, Dornier counted heavily on winning a contract from the recently reformed Luftwaffe for a light trainer. After extensive evaluation of the aircraft, the DO-27 became the first German aircraft to be mass-produced since 1945. 10 years after its total destruction, Germany's aviation industry had been reborn. A larger addition to the Stoll family, the Doe 28, was launched in 1960 and proved as successful as its predecessor. Dornier, still the prime mover in the design program, celebrated his 70th birthday as Germany's leading aviation designer. 10 years later, the last development of the Stoll family took to the air, the Sky Servant. Larger than its predecessor, it soon proved a vital element in many Third World relief operations. The German armed forces also bought large numbers of the Sky Servant, which became their main transport aircraft. With the threat of a surprise attack from the east, the Luftwaffe asked for a whole range of quick response aircraft. Dornier soon began work on a vertical takeoff and landing design. Referring back to a patent he originally made in 1924, he developed a small piston-engined extreme short takeoff and landing aircraft, designated the Doe 29. Encouraged by the success of the Doe 29, Dornier was keen to move onto a larger project. In 1962, the development of the Doe 31, a large vertical takeoff and landing transport aircraft, was given the go-ahead. 2 years later, watched by Dornier and his wife, the test rig takes to the skies. Some 200 successful test flights were made, and Dornier, although then in his 80s, vigorously pursued the development of a prototype. In 1967, the world's first and only Vertol jet transport takes to the air. In nearly 500 flights, the validity of Dornier's Vertol concept is completely proven. Although the Doe 31 never found a commercial market, it re-established German aviation's lead in technical innovation. While Dornier enjoyed success, Willy Messerschmidt struggled for survival. Despite a series of highly advanced designs, such as the X-1, a prototype Vertol fighter developed in 1962, his company survived only by building aircraft like the Douglas Harvard under small license contracts with the USA. But things were soon to change.
Then came larger license manufacturing programs. The biggest one was the Lockheed Starfighter program, American license, and that really helped to rebuild the company in a fairly big scale, considering the post-war situation.
Messerschmitt's production soon began to expand. In 1955, he took over the Heinkel Company, writing the last chapter in their long battle. Other acquisitions followed, beginning a highly significant trend in European aviation.
I think that was the start of the big wave of subsequent mergers which took place, simply because the number of projects which could be offered and which were available in the aviation business reduced. The designs were more far-reaching, while in the old days, about every year or two, a new design was done. Now a design was lasting for 10 or even 20 years. MBB, Messerschmitt Bölkow Blohm, was formed in 1969 to 1970 on that account.
MBB has now become the largest aircraft manufacturer in Germany. Cooperation has also become international. The Transall C-160, a large transport aircraft, is made in cooperation with Aerospatiale. MBB has the major stake in the design work and constructs the whole of the fuselage. They also produce a helicopter, the BO-105, designed and produced exclusively in Germany and sold in both civil and military variants. In 1970, having seen his company rebuilt from nothing, Willy Messerschmidt felt able to retire. Claude Dornier never retired, staying with his company until his death in 1969. His spirit as a manager of people and designer of aircraft had molded his company for 60 years. The Dornier company survives today as the last independent aircraft manufacturer in Germany and remains at the forefront of aircraft design. The Alpha jet, an advanced trainer and light bomber, is currently being flown by the German, French and Belgian armed forces. In the late 60s, NATO recognized the need to standardize its various aircraft types. MBB realized that European cooperation could challenge the USA's aircraft producers. That idea came to fruition with the Panavia Consortium, combining Germany, Italy, and the UK. This cooperative effort was to produce one of the most advanced aircraft of modern times, the Tornado. Given its first test flight in 1974, the Tornado brought together all the best elements of previous attack aircraft. The Tornado's most recognizable feature is its variable wing configuration, allowing for both supersonic flight and high maneuverability at low speeds. In 1980, the Tornado became the frontline strike aircraft of the British, Italian, and German air forces, beating off competition from the USA's F-16. German aircraft expertise, combined with European cooperation, had won the day. As well as large stakes in the design, MBB build the central fuselage segment and assemble all Tornadoes destined for the German armed forces. They also have a major stake in the Airbus program, being partners with Aerospatiale and British Aerospace in the consortium of Airbus Industries. Inspired by the Tornado's success, Airbus was conceived as a challenge to the USA's domination in the field of passenger aircraft. Development began in the 1970s with the A300, a mid-range wide-bodied aircraft. Test flights proved successful and large orders were placed. Construction of the Airbus takes place all over Europe, with MBB building fuselage sections in Hamburg and Dornier the rear fuselage sections, control surfaces and bulkheads in Munich. Components for the Airbus are then transported by Super Guppy, a converted strata cruiser, to Toulouse for final assembly. Success of the A300 has produced a whole family of Airbus jets, including the larger A310 and the highly advanced fly-by-wire A320, using electronics rather than hydraulics. The 320 leads a range of aircraft already used by over 80 airlines. German aviation is challenging the United States in a new, dangerous but rewarding field, space.
In the space area, European collaboration also started in the 60s, and the most significant element is, of course, the autonomous launching capability through Ariane. And it's quite significant that Ariane has developed into a commercial venture also, not just a government-run venture through the Ariane Space company, in which MBB is also a partner among many other European companies.
Germany also contributes a large part to the Columbus project, a highly advanced space laboratory that will be part of the USA's space station. Going into operation at the turn of the century, it will collect all kinds of information to help man's understanding and future exploration of space. Europe has always lagged behind in the field of manned spaceflight, but this is about to change. The Hermes space module, launched on an Ariane 5 rocket, will take the first European astronaut into space. Future projects such as Zengar will revolutionize high-speed passenger transport and will reduce the flight time from London to Sydney to just 45 minutes. Throughout the destruction that had marked the darker side of German aviation, the desire to fly endured. The dream had been fulfilled.